I'm Alan Ewert. I was most recently, I'm a professor emeritus from Indiana University and taught the core program for about 10 or so years. Currently I'm a board member of Outward Bound, Northwest Outward Bound.
All right, thanks. So just so everyone knows, I'm Curt Davidson, assistant professor at Cal State Long Beach, and work also at Alpenglow Education doing outdoor adventure research consulting. And we have the behavior and group management certification, the behavioral first responder. So, yeah. So, Alan, what I'd like to do is talk to you today about judgment and decision making, and particularly in adventure education and outdoor leadership. So, what are your thoughts on why it's important for an important topic that often gets included in classes about adventure ed and so on and so forth?
Sure. Well, let's use a real life example. Right now, the Outward Bound schools, as is Knowles, as are a number of other programs, are faced with the decision of whether to shut their programs down for the coronavirus. And that involves a number of vexing decision points. Individual programs will have to shut down. What do you do with the staff? Do you hire staff? Do you try to retain staff? What do you do with the administrative staff, et cetera? There's a whole host of things that have to go into that decision, not the least of which is the health of the students and your instructors. So that's one example of a real life decision based on information available, based on the judgment that the decision makers have, and based on their intuition on what's the correct course of action. Not the least of which is say also external modes of information, such as from the government. So that's one issue, one decision that's facing this industry right now as we speak.
Interesting. Yeah. So, that gave us a good picture into why it's an important topic for our field. How about, though, if you're saying this is important, how does one acquire good judgment? And, is that something you think we can teach through adventure education?
Well, for example, one of the primary, if not the primary constraints to growth in these outdoor programs is not through lack of willing participants. It's not through lack of resources, barring one, and it is a lack of qualified staff, instructors. And a big piece of that qualification revolves around decision making and judgment. Well, how do you get those things? Can you teach those? Are they something that's intuitive? Are they something that you can simply substitute a guide or a rule book for? And the answer is no and yes in all three of those categories. Okay. One of the things that it's been said is that that a bad experience is a result of a bad judgment, which is often the result of a bad experience. So it's something that judgment is learned, it's experienced, and it's interpreted. It's interpreted in a number of ways, and it depends on the individual whether it's correctly interpreted or not. Like Mark Twain said, a cat that's been on a hot stove will never jump on it again, even if it's cold. So one of the things that we've been trying in this field to inculcate into our potential and our students is this idea that they, number one, learn by experience. learn by both experiences that result in good decisions and bad decisions, seek mentorship from those that are more experienced, and get as much a broad base of experience as you can get. In other words, it's been said that if you know a great deal about something, you're blind about something else. So I like instructors to have a wide variety of experiences in a wide variety of environments and in a broad spectrum of different types of programs.
Yeah, well said. How about could you speak to important skill sets to have for good judgment and decision making? Like, is there a way to break it down into more digestible pieces?
Yeah, I would say that number one is you have to have the appropriate technical skills. Too often, however, that's where the growth and development stops. So we can probably all think of good, highly skilled individuals that make pretty poor leaders. They might be good rock climbers, but they're not good leaders of students in the outdoors. They might be good at mountain biking, but they're terrible at leading a group through a mountain biking experience. So, but it is true that you have to have the skills to get your clients and your participants and patients back to the starting point, safe and sound. So part of that is, of course, having the requisite tech skills that enable you to do that. A second thing is what we affectionately call soft skills or human skills, and that's being able to communicate with individuals. It's able to be able to describe to them what the situation is and maybe what their options are. It's also a need, the ability to read what the person is feeling and thinking to the extent that's possible, and ascertain what their anxieties are. And then finally, I would say it would be useful, it's helpful to be able to evaluate where that person is in that situation. So, are they learning from this experience? Are they able to gain additional insight into the experience via mentorship? And then are they applying that information and that knowledge in the next experience?
Okay. Interesting. So, well, that leads me to my next question is, we've talked a lot about staff and programmatic judgment decision making, but what role, if any, or is there any connection to teaching students of adventure education courses judgment and decision making, given the difficult nature that sometimes is to be a young person in our society and facing different issues? How do you see our programs contributing to their judgment and decision abilities in any way?
Sure, in a number of ways. Some of which are difficult for other types of programs to achieve. For example, I would think of things like understanding how time exerts in oftentimes a very powerful influence on decision making. It's been said that the shorter the time, the more intense the decision. That intensity comes around both not only in the problem, but also in the amount, the complexity, the perceived complexity of the problem, and the ability of a person to gather information. Excuse me. So, for example, if you have a problem on whether to, let's say a storm is approaching, you're in the mountains and a storm is approaching, and your decision is whether to continue to set up camp or to go down lower. You can imagine that if that storm is very close or upon you, the amount of time that you spend thinking about it is a lot less than if you had more time to consider all the factors. And that's called limitation, or a lessening of your ability to scope for information. It's also works in reverse. Research has indicated that inexperienced instructors or decision makers generally have consider 5 to 7 options, whereas experienced decision makers consider 1 to 3. So they spend a lot less, I should say, they spend a lot more time thinking about a lot fewer decisions that they have to make, as opposed to the inexperienced instructor. Another thing is the consequences of failure versus the probability of success. So if let's say you're approaching an area that has potential rock fall, part of your decision-making process should probably include, well, what's the probability and what's the result of us being caught in a rock slide or some rock fall, as opposed to what's the reward of getting to the other side? Do the two outweigh one another? Is one more important than the other? I would say that in an outdoor setting, one of the more powerful aspects of that environment is the actual real consequences and outcomes that are part of that experience. So you might fail to put it in very crass terms, you might fail your history test and walk out of the classroom disappointed. You might make the wrong decision on whether to take a river right or river left down a particular river, and that could have some very severe consequences on the wrong decision. What else?
Well, maybe we'll just conclude with, do you have a story that would typify the judgment decision-making issue in your mind, maybe from personal or from the field, previous instructors you've known, or anything to that effect?
Sure. I was on Mount Robson one time, which is the highest peak in the Canadian Rockies and in British Columbia. And myself and my partner had just summited Mount Robson. It was our 3rd attempt, and we finally made the top, but we were in a whiteout. And so we went down to the base of what's called the cane face. And at that point, we had a decision to make. We were now in the throes of a pretty significant storm. And that was, do we go left or right to reach our tent? Our tracks by then were blotted out. And I thought we should go left. And the person I was with thought we should go right. And we probably, if we had made the wrong choice, we wouldn't have obviously found our campsite, our tent. And we would have been in very serious problems in terms of dealing with that storm. We were still on a crevasse field of to some degree, so we had that problem. We had the problem of potential avalanches. Things were not looking too good. And so, how did we decide that? How would you decide that? Dr. Davidson says go left. Dr. Ewert says to go right.
Oh, man. I don't know. Coin toss?
Well, what I thought was, I was leading for most of the time, and so I really wasn't looking back as much as the person on the other end of the rope was. That's one point. Secondly, I was more concerned with where to put the next ice screw than, and he had much more time to sort of just kind of look around and observe the landscape. Third, he was always traditionally better at navigation and remembering trails, etc., than I was. So I decided to go with his decision. And what do you think we found?
Hopefully your tent.
The tent. So
Right.
now there were other times with the same individual that I thought I finally realized that he was making decisions with information that he didn't have. He didn't know any more about it than I did. And so in that regard, I was always a little skeptical about just taking his decisions for carte blanche.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for sitting for the interview. And maybe we'll do it again sometime soon.
I look forward to it. Okay.